Well, thank you for coming, everyone. Welcome to the webinar. Very excited to share just some of the tactics and the tips that we've picked up. We will kind of get into specifics, looking at the agenda in a second, but the general kind of broad idea that we had for this webinar was just kind of creating a discussion around how do you really cultivate long-term educational success for your children. So we'll go into kind of the intros now. I'll give everyone, all of our panelists, a second to introduce themselves and kind of give some color to their backgrounds. So first, we have Michael Vogel.
Yeah, so thanks so much for having me today. My name is Michael, or Mike Vogel. My background is I've been a private tutor, department chair, and associate academic dean for liberal arts in secondary and supplementary education companies for about a decade. I have a lot of experience working with students from K through 12, as well as some limited experience with undergraduate students in English language and social studies enrichment. And I've seen a lot of firsthand experience as to the ways in which that we can help kind of provide support and increase reading comprehension, writing structure, and overall performance in English language arts with a little bit of help along the way when it comes to speeding up students in their vocabulary, composition, and all sorts of other elements of writing.
Awesome. Well, thanks for that introduction. And Miriam, if you want to go ahead and introduce yourself.
Yeah, welcome. Thank you for joining. My name is Miriam, and I have been in the education world for the past about 15 years. I say that I stumbled upon a career in education. I became a math teacher, a high school math teacher out of college, developed a love for teaching students math, became department chair, and then I decided to explore other avenues of education as I was seeing the nuances of what was happening in the classroom and the whole education world in general and how it was evolving. So I started writing some SAT test prep, some official SAT test prep questions with College Board, and then I transferred into the K through 12 math curriculum development in in the online and ed tech world.
Awesome. So now we're just going to go into covering kind of the agenda for today. So pretty much we're going to start with just focusing on the panelists and asking some common, more basic questions relevant to early education. And then we'll go into answering some of the audience's questions. So feel free to submit questions that you have through the chat function. And then kind of once we get through those common questions, then we can start addressing those. And then we're going to go through a quick kind of description of ClassUp, what ClassUp is, and how it kind of fits into this whole cultivation of that long-term success for early education. But kind of starting off, I mean, we'll kind of start kind of general and then move to more specifics. But I think generally an issue for a lot of parents that have young children is they don't exactly know when their child is struggling. So Michael, we can go ahead and start with you, but if you'd like to kind of elucidate some of your ideas about ways to identify if a student is struggling, that'd be awesome.
Sure, absolutely. So when we talk about ELA, and when I use ELA, meaning English language arts education for younger students in elementary school, starting really as early as preschool or kindergarten, all the way up until 5th or 6th grade, this is a time where English education is extremely diverse. Depending on where you're going to school, what environment you're coming from, English education can look like creative writing assignments. It can look like the beginnings of research. It can look like the beginnings of deeper reading comprehension, or it can look like none of that structure at all. It can be extremely freeform. And I think the most common struggle for parents when it comes to understanding how my child is doing in terms of ELA is knowing really how what they're doing in school correlates to how well they're understanding material and how well they're growing as a reader and a writer. So one very common thing that I get from many of my clients over the years I've worked as a private tutor is I see my kid doing these things in class, but I don't understand why they're doing it. I don't understand why they're coloring things in, or why they're describing things, or why they're reading books or not, or where is my student supposed to be compared to what they're actually doing. And the biggest challenge is probably housed in that flexibility of expectation, depending on where you are, what your expectations individually are compared to the expectations of your school and your school district. It can be extremely hard to narrow down exactly where your student stands in comparison to where, in your opinion, in their opinion, they should be. And a lot of that feedback that you do get comes in the form of more abstract progress reports and write-ups and conferences with teachers. At this stage, you're kind of before the time where you're receiving concrete A through F grades. You're mostly getting commentary on how teachers view a student's growth. And while that can be insightful, it can also be very subjective. You can have grade 2, a teacher saying that your student is doing incredibly, where grade 3, suddenly they say they're behind the curve and struggling. And you wonder, how in the world did we get behind from one year to the next without anybody noticing? So if we're talking about the most common educational struggle when it comes to English and language arts and social studies, it is kind of the fluidity of the expectations, and that when you look in 2 different places, you can get 2 completely different sets of what a student ought to be doing at any given time. And as a parent and as someone who's managing the educational growth of a student, it can be hard to keep all of those disparate opinions straight.
Absolutely. I mean, I think that's really insightful. And Miriam, would you like to comment on that or add on to that?
Yeah, and I think in general, coming from a lot of the struggles at this age can be similar but very different. So one thing that I try to do with students and with my own children is to assess, how can I assess where they are? And so what I do is I ask them, the biggest thing for me is saying, why? Why do you know this? So if I have them do a problem and they just do it, why do you know that this is valid? And so I think one way to assess on your own how your child is doing is to ask them that question. Can they teach it to you? Because a lot of learning is about retention. And if they can't explain it to you, if they can't, teach it themselves, and when I say teach it themselves, I say this lightheartedly. An elementary student isn't going to be able to eloquently explain, every single concept, but can they give you some sort of justification as to why they're doing things? I think that's one good indicator on how well they're understanding what's going on in the classroom. And then additionally, I do know that in elementary, one thing that's hard coming from a math perspective and math background is that math builds, and it builds very quickly. And so when you get report cards, those come 3-4 times a year, which that's really hard to only get that much feedback when the class is moving quickly ahead, right? If you're getting you need to get feedback on addition before you start multiplication. So I think finding ways to figure out where your student is before those report cards come out, and even though it's not letter grades, you'll still see, how it's satisfactory or above average. And so I think those are helpful tools in determining where your student is when they don't have assessments right away and when they're not receiving letter grades. And
definitely. And kind of just bringing that one more level down, you have these conversations or, whatever the tactic may be to identify those struggles. You observe that the child is kind of experiencing some generalized struggle. But especially for really young children who might not, as you said, might not be able to eloquently express their, interpretation or their intuition behind, some of their homeworks or some of their questions. How do you really kind of laser in on the specific struggles, whether that's subject related or more, thought process related? How do you kind of position those conversations to really focus in on the specific struggles of a student when it might even be the case that the child doesn't know exactly what they're struggling with or isn't able to express that?
Sure, I can take
yeah,
yeah.
You can go ahead.
So from the perspective of writing, the truly most effective and one of the really most cogent ways that you can begin this process is to get involved yourself. That writing instruction and really young learning for students in general is not a participant sport. It's not an observation sport. It's a participant sport. You need to get involved if you're going to understand what's actually happening. So for writing, one of the things that I recommend to many parents of K-5 students is start mimicking and parroting the activities and the behaviors you want to see your students working with you. One of the things I recommend a lot is keeping a tandem journal, just doing a little bit of writing every single day, writing about your day, writing about how school was, writing about something you're excited about, writing about something interesting that you saw. And you can do it with your student every single day. It only takes 5 minutes to write a little sentence or 2 or 3 down. But what it will allow you to do is gain insight incrementally over time. You get to watch your students' handwriting, your students' idea formation, your students' understanding of structure and function of grammar as it begins to develop. And if you have a student who, like Lucian indicated, may not be as salient in their ability to communicate what is going well and what isn't, rather than sitting them down and asking them to explain it to you, or worse, sitting them down in front of you and a teacher and other people that they may worry about the implications of being judged by and saying, tell us what's going on, tell us what you think is going wrong, you can coax it out of them through action and create a space where your student or your child says to you, hey, well, you're doing it, so that means it's okay for me to do it too. And by participating and becoming an active participant and not just an observer in your child's writing growth, you get a firsthand experience to look at how they're developing. And this doesn't just stop with writing. This can go into reading, this can go into vocabulary, this can go into kind of any element that you want. But the moral of this action is that the more that you become an active participant, even if that participation is no more than 5 or 10 minutes a day, the more you control the narrative and you control the growth, rather than being ambushed by a report card coming out of left field and you having no idea that this has been going on for multiple months. You can see issues as they develop and get out ahead of them. And you don't need to be an expert in English or an expert in writing or even a journeyman or a novice in English or writing to see these things, right? All you need to have is a perspective of, is my child really struggling with this? Do I put a pencil in their hand and give them a piece of paper and say, go for it? And they sit there for 20 minutes and can't put down a word. If that's happening and you see them fighting themselves, you see, I don't know what to say, I don't know what to write, I don't know what to do, that might be the beginnings of a problem that hasn't manifested itself yet, right? That could be catching an issue developing before it actually starts to affect their academic performance. So to summarize, get involved is my biggest piece of advice when it comes to participating and having an effect on ELA education early. Model the behaviors that you want to see your students participating in, and you will find rapid improvement as the space becomes one where they feel that they're allowed to participate and especially allowed to make a mistake and know that it doesn't have an implication.
And Miriam, do you want to add on to that quickly?
Yeah, I mean, just I'll quickly piggyback on that. So this isn't as natural for people to do, but math is everywhere. And so I myself am constantly asking my kids about math, whether they know it or not. So I will slide things into the conversation all the time. I've explained to someone how, regardless of what the standards say, our brains are wired to think logically. And so there are topics that you, for example, there's a topic that's covered in 3rd grade that I was able to organically discuss with my child in kindergarten and have him understand this topic in kindergarten. So it doesn't have to be going ahead always, but most teachers will send out, this is what we're covering this week or this month. So if you have an idea, especially in elementary, when most of us can understand concepts such as addition, multiplication, these are things that you can bring up very organically on a walk. I constantly am going on walks and talking about math with my children. And so just having it very available for them and having them recognize it all around them. And like Mike is saying, just engage with them, and it will become something that they no longer dread, just sitting down, computing. It'll become something that they understand and can enjoy and understand why they're doing it.
Yeah, and I think that definitely holds true, but kind of on the other side of that coin, I mean, as much as you want to, boost that interaction, as much as you want to bring up these things organically, I definitely also think that some of these really young children might simply, and maybe it does take some coaxing, maybe you can get along that path, but I think a lot of these children are, I don't know if scared is the right word, or if they don't want to be judged, but I think there is that feeling that they are in some capacity, I guess, like culpable to their parents. So in terms of kind of supplementary education, something like ClassUp, how do you kind of envision that playing into the identification of some of the struggles that we've talked about? And Miriam, if you want to go ahead and spearhead this one.
Yeah, I mean, the biggest thing to like as far as boosting confidence with math, I think it like you said, kids can get discouraged really quickly, and I've seen it through one-on-one interactions a lot. And so the biggest thing is and actually I mean, we can take this outside of the classroom, right? We can take this to sports, we can take it to anything with a child, is instead of saying like, why are you doing this? No, this is wrong. You identify what they're doing right and then guide it in a different direction. So again, this happens if I want to pull out a baseball analogy, right? I notice you're swinging really hard, but if you just adjust your bat a little bit further back, you can hit this ball really far. So the same thing applies to the classroom, right? To when you're teaching. If a student's constantly hearing, no, that's wrong, no, wrong, they're going to just shut down, and it'll all become, like Charles Schultz, the Peanuts. It'll be the parents wonking in the background, right? They won't hear it anymore. And so what instead we can say, oh, I see why, I see your thought process here. Let's think about it this way. So encouraging them to just those encouraging phrases instead of just saying no is going to be helpful for them and make them want to continue to learn. Because the biggest thing at a young age is to develop a love for learning. And we don't want to squash that when they're young.
Absolutely. And Michael, do you want to add on to that quickly?
Absolutely, yeah. So to build off of that, I can't overstate the importance of understanding that at earlier and earlier ages every year, students are being exposed to what we call a binary modality in education, to being taught to understand that there is a correct and incorrect answer to what they do. And that correct answers have implications, right? Students are learning earlier and earlier that doing well in education matters. You have to do well in elementary school to go to a good middle school. You have to do well in middle school to go to a good high school. You have to do well in high school to go to a good college. And this starts to get instilled in children very quickly, not just by parents or families, but by schools, by the media, by everyone, by their classmates, their peers. Children are inundated by what we call, again, this binary modality, that there is a right or wrong. But that binary modality breaks down in ELA quite a bit, where when you're writing something, who is to say that a paragraph is right or wrong? Right? Who's to say that the way a student decides to express themselves in writing is incorrect binarily, right? That is just wrong strictly. So students can learn very quickly and be reinforced very quickly that they are quote unquote bad at writing if teachers and mentors and even their peers are telling them what they're writing is wrong, because they come at it with the same modality that they have for every other subject, where most of their assignments are problem sets or multiple choice questions or fill in the blanks or things that are modal and that have a certain set of wrong answers and one distinct right one. But this modality can be hard to break with students. Once they've gotten it in their heads, parents, despite their best efforts, can struggle to get back to that love of learning that Miriam mentioned earlier. That developing that organic, naturally developed love of learning can be obstructed by the desire to be correct. What I've seen a lot very frequently in students I've worked with is a hesitance to even show me their written work because they're afraid that what they wrote is wrong. They're not confident that they're right, so they don't even want to participate. They don't want to show me their assignments or their paragraphs because what's going to happen if I wrote the wrong thing. And to piggyback off of what Lucian had mentioned earlier about supplementary education, this is a moment where having a third voice or another educational participant in the system can really help. And it's something I've given talks on in the past that I fondly refer to as the third adult phenomenon. That bringing in someone like a tutor or a coach or a secondary or supplementary educator can act as the quote unquote third adult, the non-parent, non-teacher educational adult. And students learn very quickly to expect a certain degree of judgment from their teachers because it's their job to provide critique, and to expect a certain degree of judgment, for better or for worse, from their parents, who hold them to expectations on occasion. But students don't know or don't expect much from these third adult figures. They haven't been conditioned to expect a judgment or a constructive criticism or a grade from these individuals. So one of the greatest elements of power and growth that a tutor has or a coach has in affecting change in a student's life is that they get to develop an educational relationship with students that is free of this binary modality. A tutor has no pressure to administer a right or wrong answer or to administer a grade. They can, back to what Miriam had mentioned, start to say, let's adjust that swing. Let's change the trajectory of what you're doing here, knowing that there's no consequence to showing me a wrong answer. In fact, you can show me all the wrong answers you want because I'm here to help you find your best way to get right. So that's, in my opinion, the most powerful thing that a supplementary educator can do in helping students break that binary modality and restore the love of learning that grows without pressure.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that binary modality comment is very, very salient to this conversation. So I think we might come back to that a little bit later. But kind of on the other hand, we've kind of, had our discussions about identifying struggles in children, how supplementary education could help with that. But for the more, I guess you could say, precocious child, for a child who's achieving above their grade level, kind of the same question. I mean, how would you know, besides your kind of basic everyday interactions with your child, how would you really know if your child would really benefit from supplementary education, or if maybe in the work they're doing in the classroom isn't enough, I guess. And if Michael, you want to start off this one.
Sure. So we have a nickname for students like this in the industry. We call them kids with the hunger, right? They want more. They want more and more and more. What they're getting in school is not enough for them, right? They want to be pushing their grade level. They want to be doing more advanced exercises. They want to be ahead of the curve. And more students year over year are kind of finding this hunger as a result of more competitiveness in schools, as a result of easier access to information and education in general, with more ubiquitous access to the internet. There are a lot of reasons why this is happening. But something that can happen quickly when it comes to having a child like this growing up in your household is their desire for content knowledge can outstrip your own expertise. For example, if you're sitting down at the dinner table and a student asks you, but in between bites of chicken, what a subordinating conjunction is, many people might not be able to answer that question and shouldn't feel like they should be held responsible for it, right? Who's thought about subordinating conjunctions in the last 30 years? But one of the things that supplementary education can do is continue to provide challenge, right? To help students understand that, yeah, okay, you're in fourth grade and you're reading at a sixth grade level. Okay, let's start chapter books. Let's see if we can go to seventh grade. Let's see if we can keep giving you that drive, giving you material to feed that hunger that you have. Because one very quick way that students become discouraged by school in general is getting the opinion that school is just boring, that they go to school, they're not stimulated, they're not engaged, their teachers aren't giving them what they want to see. So they start to dread school. They start to not look forward to the process of education in general. And this happens for many reasons. And one of them is that students are simply understimulated by content sometimes, especially in liberal arts classes. If you're reading at a higher than grade level, you're simply not going to be given interesting materials, material that pushes you, that challenges you, that kind of scratches that itch in your head, because the rest of your classmates might not just be at the level that you are right now. And this, I'm sure Miriam will attest, holds true in other subjects as well. But for ELA, this can be a tough itch to scratch because it's so hard to parse out exactly where one grade level ends and the next begins. Because written language arts, English doesn't parse out as nicely into units. It's kind of blended all together into different skill sets, and different states and different school districts have different sets of standards that they use to kind of put people into different boxes. But overall, having supplementary education can help push people towards, or push students towards, grasping at that next level in more effective ways, and takes the burden off of the parents to always kind of know what's happening next unit or next year, if that makes sense.
Definitely. And Miriam, do you want to add on to that?
Yeah, so I think one of the big, it sounds funny to say it's a struggle having a child who is above grade level, but it is a struggle because I think one of the things that a parent is then considering is, well, if my child needs to be content wise in the next grade level, but then the social part is usually the hang up, right? You want your child to still be with their peers. I do know students like this, and a lot of them will often actually act out in class, and they'll, I do know some students who have intentionally not performed as well as they can because they're bored. And so, like Michael said, just, providing extra for them is really useful. So for example, we live in a time where creativity is what we need. We live in, a tech boom. Everyone has to be creative to create everything that's happening now. Every single social media platform, every single technological advancement comes from creativity. So I think a big thing is they're at your fingertips. Like Michael said, there's this supplemental education where you can challenge your students and encourage them to be really creative. And it goes back to, you want them to develop this passion for learning. And so find something that they're excited about. Like, is your child excited about Legos? They have STEM Lego classes. Is your child excited? Do they like math? Take it to the next level. They have coding. There's so many different ways to engage them in what they're learning that, right now, because we have this online platform, you have all these resources at your fingertips to encourage them to keep learning outside of the classroom.
Yeah, and so going off of that kind of might be a little bit of a regurgitation of what you just said, but kind of in this post-COVID educational environment, what have you guys noticed about improvements in these online resources that may have not been optimized or were as efficient in the past? And Miriam, you can go ahead and start this one if you'd like.
Yeah, I think in general, COVID has everything, education and non-educational, has created a lot of resources for everybody that are web-based. And so I think the great thing about it is it's no matter where your child is. So there are programs that are aiming to help people developmentally, psychologically. Like, what has this pandemic done? How can we encourage you to learn, but also encourage you to be healthy, mentally healthy? And so right now there's that aspect of the online education. There's also just significantly more resources because everybody was having to learn on a computer for so long. Now you have online tutoring. I mean, we've had this for a long time, but you have so many options and so many more programs. So you have now curriculum associated with this online learning. And you have stuff where your student can be self-paced. They can, and again, I'm repeating myself, but a lot more in terms of courses to spark your child's interest, where pre-pandemic, it was pretty mild. Like there was, math, English, and very traditional. But now there's everything at your fingertips, every single class from kids to adults that you can take any class online. Yeah, I think, Mike, I'll hand that over to you.
Yeah, and go ahead if you have any additional recommendations, comments on that.
Sure. So one of the things, kind of as Miriam mentioned, that the pandemic did was kind of strip away the curtain on the education system. In forcing schools online and transitioning education from in-person to online in its scrappiness and kind of chaos at the beginning of the pandemic, a lot of vulnerabilities in the way that education exists online were exposed. And students suffered nowadays from what we kind of colloquially refer to as the COVID bubble, where many students that went through parts of school during the pandemic are a grade or two behind because of the inability to convert what was entirely in-person curriculum to online formats fast enough to avoid content gaps. So a lot of what we do in the secondary education or supplementary education industry is kind of help fix the COVID bubble for students and kind of catch people back up. But one of the unsung blessings of the pandemic for education is it is forced the education industry to get creative, to re-examine itself and start designing education and curriculum with online mediums in mind. Rather than just trying to bootstrap what already exists into an online format, nowadays, many online resources have been built from the ground up to service online education with modules, questions, curricula, data sets, everything designed to appeal to online learners. And year over year, even semester over semester, we gain more data and more deeper understanding about how students learn best online. And we start to dispel some of the rumors that like writing can't be taught online or geometry can't be taught online. Those things are starting to go away. We're finding that basically anything can be taught online, provided you have the right approach. And one of the ways in which companies like ClassUp and many others in the sphere have tried to tackle this is by looking at curriculum and looking at education in a different way, basing the way we interact with students and the way that we interact in the entire top to bottom education sphere with online communication and online versatility in mind. So you'll see a lot of customizable curriculum. You'll see a lot of user participation and customization in a way that you don't see a lot in classrooms, where students and parents get a hands-on choice of what they want their students to be learning, curating their own curriculum, working through materials at their own pace, whether that's slower for more remedial students or faster for more accelerated students. Online platforms and online education itself brings an extreme amount of flexibility and versatility to education in a way that I think we're just barely scratching the surface of. And year over year, we will see more and more innovation and development in the sphere.
Absolutely. And kind of in addition to that, just as a quick question, so in addition to those online resources, things like ClassUp, what kind of programs, activities would you recommend for children who are either maybe a little bit behind or a little bit ahead of the curve? And Michael, you can go ahead.
Sure. So for writing, I think about, when it comes to K-5 specifically, targeting areas that only become more important with time, right? Miriam had made a comment about this earlier in the talk, where fundamentals never stop being important, right? Math especially is a cumulative subject. Everything builds off the next. That is true to a large degree in writing as well, but it's not as structured like a stair step. It's more that if you don't learn how to use a comma, when you have to write a 5-paragraph essay, that's going to be very difficult for you. Or if you aren't sure what a complete sentence is, writing many of them into a paragraph is near impossible. And since feedback is so diverse and teacher expectations are so spread out in the ELA space, it can be very hard to settle down on what the set of fundamentals actually is. So if you're looking for whether you're behind at grade level or ahead of grade level, the best things to focus on when it comes to developing ELA online, it is a return to and a development of those fundamentals, making sure that you can execute every little thing that you need to know how to do, from basic grammar and composition to sentence function, to reading comprehension and annotation, to summary, paragraph writing, anything you can name. You can go down the rabbit hole on any of these subjects down to their fundamental basics, so that students know that regardless of the idiosyncrasies of any teacher they may have at any point in their academic career, their knowledge of the structure and basic foundations of writing and literature is sound. And that's something that can be imparted, practiced, and reinforced and perfected very, very gracefully in an online space.
Miriam, you have anything to add on to that?
Yeah, I'm just going to jump on what Mike said. Is for speaking for math, and Mike touched on this, is we call them skill gaps. So for example, when I was teaching AP calculus, I wasn't every student's teacher from grades K through whatever grade it was, through middle school. So I relied on what they learned previously in order to teach what I needed to teach. I would have students who couldn't factor a polynomial, and that was something that they needed to know how to do very quickly. So making sure, like Mike said, these skill gaps for every student, even students who, they placed into AP calculus, so they were strong students, but they still had skill gaps. So making sure that, how those skill gaps though, cost them on AP exams. So making sure that even if they're successful, that everything before what they're currently doing, they have a solid foundation. Another thing as far as online learning goes is from a math perspective, I think the hardest thing for students and for parents, based on what I heard from them, was not receiving quick feedback. So, you know, if the teacher wasn't, and this is teacher by teacher. So if the teacher took 2 weeks to return a quiz and they had to take the test before they got feedback on that quiz, there's no way of knowing what they needed to study or prepare for on that test. So one thing that's beneficial, and to go back to Lucian's question about, what's great about these new online programs, is the quick turnaround in feedback. Whether it's an online tutor or an online self-paced program, you're going to get immediate feedback. Whereas if you're waiting in a classroom, and these teachers have a hard job. So grading 150 essays, grading 150 tests, it's hard for them to always get feedback as quickly as your student needs it. And so that's one benefit to these online programs is you're either working on a self-paced program where you're getting feedback automatically, or you're working one-on-one with a tutor where they can give feedback a lot quicker.
Definitely. And now kind of moving towards some more subject-specific questions, starting with Michael and with respect to ELA. I would just kind of ask, like, what do you think are some educational struggles that are unique to ELA? I don't know if you'd like to comment on kind of the binary modality and build more off of that, but I think that's the question that a lot of parents have.
Absolutely. So going back to that idea of binary modality and correct versus incorrect answers, one of the things that ELA learners struggle with the most is the variation in expectations between years. For example, I have had many students in my own career who say, I've written this way for my teacher last year and I got really good feedback. And then I write the same way for my teacher this year and my teacher says I'm doing everything wrong. And this is not an uncommon story. You can probably pick a hand, like out of 100 students, I would say 95 of them have had an experience like this, where there's a general inconsistency of feedback between different teachers and between different grades in school, especially when it comes to as students are kind of at the precipice of cresting between 5th and 6th grade, 6th and 7th grade, where all of a sudden the expectations of writing become a lot more stringent, right? Between 5th and 6th, especially, you go from a lot of flexibility in things like improper sentence usage and incomplete sentences, sentence fragments, and things like that, to a lot more rigid understanding of those concepts in middle school. And students who have gone through different feedback systems and had a lot of varying degrees of positive and negative reinforcement throughout elementary school are fundamentally unprepared for that transition more often than not. So I would say the most salient specific struggle for English language arts is in that fluidity of feedback, where a student can believe that they're doing everything right, and then all of a sudden be told that they're not anymore, and not really told where that jump happened, right? All of a sudden, what I'm doing isn't right, but no one told me when it wasn't right anymore, right? No one told me what to do. And that can very quickly start the descent into a dislike of reading and a dislike of English, because students get it in their heads that they simply aren't good at it. And I know Miriam will talk about this in much more depth, that students can get that very deeply embedded in them by both themselves as well as their environments, that they just simply aren't good at the subject. And that can be the biggest handicap in and of itself to actually developing skills, is that kind of built-in bias in their heads that, like, oh, no matter what the effort I put into this subject, or in this case, English or reading or writing, I'm never going to be good at it because I'm just bad at English. And I staunchly don't believe in that. I think that every student has the capacity to be good at every subject. And it comes down to identifying and providing structured feedback in a way that students understand. Even if the feedback is more constructive in nature rather than complimentary in nature, you can still deliver that feedback in a way that students understand where it's coming from, where they may have gone wrong, and last but not least, what concrete steps they can use to move forward.
Absolutely. And kind of building off of that, I mean, do you have any kind of tactics, tips to help tutor these more creative, perhaps subjective subjects?
Well, like I had said at the top of the talk, get hands-on involved as early as possible, right? Writing is not something that you need to have a master's degree in order to help a student with, right? You can get on a piece of paper with a student and start modeling good behaviors early. And those good behaviors don't have to be using commas perfectly. They can be as simple as making sure you set aside time every day to write, right? Making sure you spend 20 minutes a day reading something that isn't on your iPad or isn't on your phone, opening up a book, even if it's simple, and taking a little bit of time every day to read. All that matters is that they start building those habits early so that by the time middle and high school roll around, they don't see reading and writing as this task they have to accomplish. It's simply something that they've done their whole life. So as far as what you can do starting tomorrow to help make a positive impact in your students' ELA experience is get involved yourself. Set aside the time, 5 minutes, 10 minutes, however many minutes you can spare every day to start developing those good habits. And if that's not something that makes sense in your time budget, if we're all very busy working people out here, that's a good time to explore supplementary education options, because if you don't feel confident doing that, a tutor certainly does.
Yeah, definitely. And I think that's very insightful, and kind of moving towards math as a subject. Miriam, I mean, you kind of commented on this earlier, but do you mind kind of providing some more color on just how cumulative and linear, in a sense, math is, and how,
Yeah.
I guess, how important those early stages of development are?
Yeah, and really quick, I want to touch on something Mike said. When he talked about setting aside time, I can say I completely understand that. Full disclosure, I have 3 children who are in sports, who are in school. I work full time. So I understand these schedules and how you think when someone tells you to do something, there's no way I can fit that in, right? I barely have time to wash my hair. And so when we're talking about fitting things in, and again, I'm not an ELA expert, but sitting here listening to what Mike is saying, depending on the age and ability of your child, like you can embed English organically, right? So like, hey, can you go write a letter to your cousin, right? Can you go read these instructions for me? I'm cooking. Can you help me read these instructions? So even small things that are incorporating it into your daily routine will be helpful. So sorry, that was a quick tangent there. But yeah, there's ways to incorporate these, like I was saying, on walks. It can be, it's hard, but you can be creative in incorporating these into your daily life. As far as math goes, yes, math is very linear and it builds. And I have seen students feel like they are drowning. I taught high school, so it's, I taught AP calculus, and they feel like they're drowning when they have these skill gaps. So one thing I try is to say, tackle it early, because if they're struggling with their basics with fractions are a big deal. Decimals, multiplying, adding, subtracting. If they struggle with that early, it's not going to get easier. And so it's so important to have early intervention for math, because as much as it seems like it's this extra stress, it will actually, as they build their confidence. So we talk about being competent and confident. So as they build these at an early age, it will make things exponentially easier as they get older. So versus if you wait and wait for to see this deep struggle, then they're feeling like it's the catch-up game. Plus they have all of the work that they currently have to do in addition to filling in these skill gaps. So it's really important to seek this early intervention when you do see your students start to struggle.
Definitely.
And then to go on kind of what Mike said about I hear this all the time. I actually heard it today, Mike, now that you said that. I heard a parent say, well, I have this child who, he's like me. We're not good at math. We're not, but this other child is really good. And I remember hearing someone say that they had a math disorder, and it makes me cringe, because I'm not going to say that every student is going to perform at the same level all the time, or that every student is going to understand everything the same. That's not going to happen. However, I do think that there is potential in every single student, if they try, and if as parents guide them in the right direction, at an early age. I do think that, and I've seen it. I've seen students, some of my weakest students become my strongest students. But again, these students have, they were older, they were in high school, but, they sought out help, or their parents pushed them to seek help. And I saw these students come from one of my weaker students to some of my strongest students getting 5s on the AP exam. Blew me away that happens, but it's amazing because they put in the work. So I do think as far as math goes, always know that your child can do it. Even if it takes them a little extra work in the beginning, it is worth it.
Absolutely. And now moving towards some audience questions, and also people in the audience, feel free to continue asking questions. But we had a question here, and kind of with respect to the discussion that we had on these online resources, just quickly, do you guys have any recommendations for websites or for services that, I guess not that necessarily you enjoy using, but that you would recommend to students? And Miriam or Michael, or whoever wants to answer this first, go ahead.
Sure.
Yeah, go ahead, Miriam.
I guess the first thing I think is there are hundreds of resources. So what I would think about is just, who is your student? Like, who is your child? How are they going to interact? Right? Are they going to interact better with a one-on-one tutor? Or are they someone who likes to kind of take their time and learn on their own without someone constantly talking to them? So I think how I would answer this is there are many specifics programs out there, but what I would look at is first think about how your child's going to learn. Every learner is different. And so if you think a tutor will benefit them, if they're the kind of person who needs to bounce ideas off of people and have that back and forth conversation, I would move towards a ClassUp like platform. If your student is someone who likes to work on their own, there are a lot of self-paced programs. I don't even know if I have the time to list them. There are paid programs. There are, there are free programs out there. And a lot of what I would say is the schools will have kind of like a database of programs that they provide for free. And that would probably be my first go-to, because I know my kids have a login and there's different programs on there that they can use first that are usually free. If you're looking for paid programs, I guess we could there could be a prepared list, but I would just start a search on specific, self-paced math programs, self-paced English programs. That would be my starting point.
Michael, any recommendations?
Absolutely. So to mirror something that Miriam brought up, is that there are hundreds, if not thousands, of options out there for self-paced or individual instruction sorts of courses. But one of the things you have to remember when you do something that is self-paced or is not moderated by a tutor or an education professional in the sphere is it's only going to go as fast as the student is going to allow it to go. Right. So if you have a student that is already resistant to a certain subject or already not really bought into the idea of building up their education, you can give them 100 different websites to use, but they may just not use them at all. So there are lots of free websites out there. Project Gutenberg is a great place to look for books for students to read. K-5 learning is great for younger students for learning modules and reading modules that you can use for basic comprehension. But as far as results are concerned, nothing beats having another person in the room, right? Using a curated experience like a tutor or like an education professional is probably the way to get the best results. And while it does require an investment from the parent, it is the best way to provide results both in the short and the long term. Of course, we offer these at ClassUp. There are many services out there that offer something similar, and it's a matter of finding the best fit for you and for your student, really, what kind of learning style they have, what types of people they respond best to, what types of medium they respond best to. Are they an online learner? Are they an in-person learner, or some combination of both? These are all questions to kind of help you self-audit what sorts of resources make the most sense for you specifically. But these are also conversations that we're happy to help facilitate with you as well. So always happy to lend a hand when it comes to finding the best resources for your child.
Definitely. And I think we've touched a lot on online resources. We've touched a lot on identifying when a student has a struggle, when a student is, kind of above the curve. but something that I think we haven't talked as much about. I would love to hear just some general tips, tricks, tactics to build a good study habits and to really make sure that your child is internalizing the worth of time management, because I don't think we've touched on that as much. And Michael, if you want to lead this off, and we can pass it off to Miriam in a second.
Sure, yeah. So I'll share my favorite short implement trick that you can use for this. So alongside English language arts, I've also taught psychology and AP psychology for many years, and I borrow this from my psychology teaching experience with a trick that we call the method of loci, where if you set aside a specific location in your home for the study location and start reinforcing that as soon as possible, like a corner of a living room or under a specific light or in a room that is not used often. If you designate that space as the study space, and that is the only thing that your student ever does in that space. They don't play games there, they don't watch TV there, they're not on their phone there, they're not sleeping or eating or playing with their friends. Nothing ever happens in that space except for studying. It is an extremely effective way to start building a distinction between study time and non-study time, which is one of those cognitive sets that you can start reinforcing early that'll help students build study habits moving forward. And you can do this as early as kindergarten or first grade. It's just a matter of establishing an environment that is for learning versus an environment that is not. And a common response I get when I introduce this from parents is, what about school? Why is the classroom not that place? Because lots of other interactions happen in the classroom. Students are talking to their friends, they're making paper airplanes, they're playing games on their calculators. That's what I used to do when I was a kid. You know, all sorts of other sorts of stimuli happen in a conventional classroom. But if you set aside a quiet, undisturbed, unbroken space at home that is reserved specifically for studying, it will dramatically increase retention, study efficiency, study effectiveness, basically any metric you can evaluate. So that's a quick and easy tip for helping to develop kind of positive and growth-oriented study habits early.
Yeah, I mean, that's a brilliant trick. Miriam, do you have anything to add on to that, or any additional tactics?
Yeah, I mean, I just think the students who were very successful were very organized. So I can tell you routine. I think I would say is establishing a routine. I know, like, I have my kids make their bed, their room's clean in the morning. They, get themselves dressed. There's, going through all these steps so they know their routine and just including their homework in that routine. So they should know, what needs to be done in the morning. What are their expectations when they come home? I'm going to add this in here, turn it into your organic math problem, right? These are the activities you have after school. This is how much homework you have. Let's look at your time, right? And figure out where that time is and how to fit it in. It's a very organic way for them to think about time and how to fit it into their day. And it's killing two birds with one stone. So I think just getting them in the use of healthy habits, like Mike was saying, and just routine. I think routine really helps, making sure, like, have them pack their backpacks, make sure there's not a ton of stuff in their backpacks, and getting them in the habit of that as well, I think helps them stay, will help them in the long run, especially because we're speaking of young students, starting them just having routines when they're young is really helpful with that.
Yeah. And then kind of in the interest of time, we'll have this be our last question, but we've touched a lot on kind of increasing the volume of interaction with your child and, kind of nurturing these organic conversations about schoolwork. But we had a question about where, maybe not necessarily where do you draw the line, but how do you know if you're pushing your child too much? How do you know if, and maybe this kind of relates back to some of our earlier discussions, but how do you know if they kind of need that additional push? How do you know, what really is the right amount of that extra motivation, that extra interaction? And Miriam, if you have a response for this, you can go ahead.
Yeah, I mean, again, it goes back to just, I think, knowing your student and your child, because of that question, I can't answer that I could answer that for my own kid, but answering it for another parent is really hard. So usually what, I can tell, I'm not an expert in psychology, sociology, but body language is big. You can tell if your child is being pushed too hard just by their exhaustion. How tired are they at night? And this is in every aspect, in education, in sports, and everything. Did we overcommit them, overall? And that does impact their education, because if you're committing, how many extracurriculars are they doing? And is that going to have them too exhausted to be able to focus on their studies? And so I just think reading them in general on how, and so for instance, just asking the questions, and the hard part is having the balance, because some students will say, my day was fine. I'm guarantee you everyone on here will say their kid has said, my day was fine, it was good, right? Like, what kind of questions can you ask? So what I do is I don't ask immediately. So I just give them time to unwind at the end of the day. And then once they've had time to, unwind a little bit, then you can dig in a little bit, like, what did you learn? What's this? And if they don't have a good grasp on what they learned, you might start to sense that you need a little bit more intervention in that sense. If they can tell you everything that they're doing, they might be doing great, or maybe that is indicative of them needing some extra push as far as, these interest class, we'll call them, or extra interests.
Michael, you want to build on that?
Sure. And I suppose to leave this off on a note that applies not only in this situation, but really everything we've talked about today, we're never going to have perfect information about exactly what will and won't work for your student, for your child. It's always going to be shrouded in some element of mystery, but that should never be a discouragement from trying, right? Having efficacy on your child's educational growth is a matter of trying, right? You will never know until you give it a shot. So if the question is, how do you know when enough is enough or too much is too much? Try. Get involved until you start to see reactions that are negative, right? You are the expert on your own family and your own students. And the only thing you can truly do wrong is to do nothing at all. So even if it's a very small amount at first to test the waters, getting involved in some capacity at all with your students' educational experience is never a bad decision. If nothing else, it will let them know that you are in their court, that you're there to help, you're there to provide support, you're there not just to be someone who has an expectation of grades or has an expectation of performance, but you're there for growth. And that home is as safe a place to learn as school is. So if nothing else, let the guiding message be try. Put effort in, try out new things, bring in experts if you feel the need, or try to tackle it yourself, but never be afraid to give it a shot.
Definitely. And I think with that, we're going to kind of wrap up our panel section, our Q&A section. But I've seen that some participants joined. So if you have any kind of lingering questions, feel free to just pop them into the chat. But now I'm going to pass it off to Jessica, and she's going to just provide a little background on ClassUp and how ClassUp plays in to this whole discussion that we've had.
All right, thank you, Lucian, Michael, and Miriam for such an informative panel. I really found it to be so insightful, and I hope our parents here enjoyed it as well. So allow me to tell you a little bit more about ClassUp. I'm Jessica, I'm one of the co-founders, and a bit about my own background. I went to Princeton for undergrad and Stanford for business school. So as someone who's had quite a bit of education myself, this topic is very close to my heart. And that is why we created ClassUp, to bring high quality education to more students. So at ClassUp, our goal is to help all of our students achieve their learning objectives. And that starts first with identifying areas that might cause them challenges, and then help them prepare in accordance to school guidelines and also advance in their studies. So we know that there are lots of options out there. A couple of things that make us unique at ClassUp. One, we built our own systematic curriculum, and our team here, Michael and Miriam, are part of the folks that helped make it come alive. And we have taken the care to make our curriculum engaging, relevant, and fun for our students. Second, all of our teachers are highly trained, and they go to or went to top colleges in the US, and all of them have a ton of teaching experience. So we make sure that your child will be in good hands when they come to ClassUp. And third is what we call personalized learning. And that's actually the reason why we decided to start this company, is because we saw how much individualized support can make a difference in a child's whole learning trajectory. Just providing that safe, non-judgmental space where a student can ask any questions, interact with the teacher, and just to even think out loud. That makes all the difference. That allows a child to find passion in learning and start building confidence. So just to highlight our teachers, again, all of them are background checked. We have a very selective hiring process where we only hire 1% of our teacher applications. So rest assured that our teachers are super qualified and probably the best teachers that you can find in this country. And last but not least, when you become a ClassUp member, you not only get the classes themselves, but you also get a ton of resources and support. So after every single class, you will get feedback from the teacher. Also, all of the classes are recorded, so you can review them anytime, anywhere. And lastly, you will get a dedicated learning partner who supports your family throughout your entire journey with us. So thank you so much for joining this webinar. We hope that it was helpful to you. And if you'd like to connect with us, please go to our website, classup.com, or scan the QR code right here. We'd love to connect with you. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.